Hey there, landscape photographers. My name is Lee Hoy, and I am the precision camera and video adventure workshop instructor. I've been recruiting some others to join me, but you'll be coming out soon to join me in Big Bend National Park. And so I'm excited that you're going to be enjoying this video. You might hear a little thunder and rumbling. That's because it's monsoon season here up at the house in the Davis Mountains of West Texas. And that's one of the reasons why we schedule many of these workshops for the summertime, is because we want to go after the lightning and the monsoons, the storms. Oh yeah, that's the sound a photographer loves to hear right there. And we want to go after great night skies. So today's presentation is going to be making the most of the landscape photographic experience night and day in Big Bend National Park. So let's jump right on in. I've got quite a bit to cover. Glad you're watching this before you come out and join me. You'll be more prepared. We'll have more time for editing, for photography, and just sometimes you need a little bit of relaxation. So here we go. Let's jump on in. I'm owner of Big Bend Birding and Photo Tours. I've been birding, photographing Big Bend National Park for over 35 years. Been on every trail, every road. It's been quite an adventure as I've got to know the park. And so in about 5 or 6 years ago, I decided to start this and do this full time. And very proud to offer wonderful excursions out here in the Big Bend region. I cover Fort Davis, Davis Mountains, Marfa, Guadalupe Mountains. So it's kind of part of this Trans-Pecos region, which I love. I also lead international and domestic photography workshops for Wildside Nature Tours. Kevin Laughlin, the owner, and I became great friends. We're like brothers. And with them, at the end of this, I'll share with you some of the destinations I go. So wonderful company. Kevin started back with offering tours in Belize and covers all continents now. So, and again, I am the Adventure Workshop photography instructor for precision camera and video. So it's my pleasure to welcome you to Big Bend and to come out and join with me on this great adventure. I am very proud to be an OM system ambassador. I became an ambassador back when it was Olympus, just a few years back. I'd been using Canon for 25 years, made the jump to the Olympus system after testing Canon, Sony, and Olympus. And within a year of making the jump, I was invited to join then Olympus, now OM system, as a pro ambassador. That's an accomplishment I'm very proud of and something I love to get to do. So let's jump right on into the meat of today. Oh, that's right, I forgot. Home is where the Milky Way is. The picture on the right you're seeing there, that's my home in September when the Milky Way is pretty vertical early on in the evening. The photo on the left you can see there, that is my home and the view off of the deck looking to the west over the Davis Mountains. So I love to watch the storms, listen to the thunder. It's quite an experience up here. I don't have air conditioning in my house. Usually the temperature is quite pleasant, so I have the windows and the doors open. So if you hear a little bit of that rumble, that's what you come out here for. Just recently, I was in the Galapagos Islands, and I was snorkeling face-to-face with Galapagos penguins. Wonderful experience, great time. I get to have amazing moments like this everywhere I go, leading photography workshops. Well, I have a question for you today, and it's a very important question that I want you to take a little time to reflect on. You ready? So I'm going to ask you, what is more important? Here it is. The image or the experience? See, in my world, here's the way I've kind of thought about this. If you travel to some destination and you don't take an image, well, that's not really photography. Even if you have a great experience, lots of people do that. They have no camera in their hand. They go somewhere. Yep, they have a good time. They've enjoyed their experience, but they're not doing photography. Now, I've seen photographers who travel lots of miles or relatively close to home, have great gear. They get out in the field, and you know what? They get so engrossed sometimes in the image, and their mindset, their attitude, whatever it might be, messes up the experience. And for me, if you don't get any images, that's not photography. But if you get a lot of great images, but you really didn't have a good time, that's not much of an experience. So as I walk you through this presentation, I want you to be keeping in mind that my goal is for you to capture some great images and have a wonderful experience. And I want that for you even when you're not traveling with me. Whether you're traveling solo, with your family, in another photography workshop, let's really not do that. Why don't you come with me? I really hope that what you'll find is that you're having a great experience and capturing great images. But there's some things that you need to understand to do that. This is my formula for it. It's called preparation plus skill equals luck. Let me say that again. Preparation plus skill is going to equal luck. And I believe you'll find this equation will bear out time and time again for you. Let's jump right on into preparation, okay? One of the things that I think is most important wherever you're going to go, whether it's in your backyard, whether it's in a local park, or maybe you got a wildlife refuge or a national park, state park near you, whether you're traveling across the state, domestically or internationally, the more you understand about your destination, the better your images and your experience will be. Part of that, you're going to have more realistic expectations. You are going to have set expectations for a guide, workshop instructor. Hey, here's some things I hope to capture. And they, when you're booking a trip with me, people call me up in March and want to get lightning shots. I'm like, that's not likely going to happen. You need to come out June, July, August, and we're going to have a better chance for lightning, okay? So let's talk about some of the key ways we can understand our destination. Do you understand the various seasons of photography at a given location? The Galapagos Islands is a great example. Kevin Laughlin's been 41 times, the owner of Wildside Nature Tours. I've been 4. I'll be going on my 5th trip in September of 2022. One thing I see is a lot of people sign up for cheaper trips, but they don't realize how little time they're going to spend on the island, how many other people are on the boat. It's not photography focused. They are literally just running around the island at times. How much time you're going to spend eating meals, not photographing. You're not going to get on the islands at first light. That's just one example of one destination not knowing the seasons. They go at cheap times when it's hot, there's no breeze, the gore is gone, and it's miserable there, as opposed to when we only go when the weather's pleasant, when there's great wildlife action, and you're going to be very comfortable on the islands. Like here in Big Bend. People don't understand, we got winter time. So there you're going to want to photograph wintering birds. We're going to want to photograph or wait for winter storms. I get so many people who leave because of ice and snow. And I'm like, oh my gosh, ice and snow in the desert is amazing. Do not leave. We're looking for the wintering birds. The mammals are generally year round. Some of them, not all of them. Obviously, bats often depart the area in winter. But that's a great time. Then you've got spring. There's early spring and late spring. There's tremendous differences in the bird distribution during that time. So early spring can be a transition from wintering birds, and many breeding birds haven't arrived yet, or many migrants aren't coming through yet. So early spring can be a little rougher, whereas middle spring and late spring can be spectacular for birds. The skies often aren't very conducive to landscape photography during spring. People don't realize you want to do Big Bend bluebonnets. Yeah, that's December through March. It's not the same as Texas Hill Country bluebonnets. So people often ask, when do I come for wildflowers? Well, if you can come, 7 to 14 days after a good rain in summer, should be awesome. You can't plan 2 years ahead to try to get a lot of wildflowers in Big Bend. So then you get to summer, right? Everybody thinks it's so hot. We spent the last 2 out of 3 of our days, once the storms came through, upper 70s, low 70s, even upper 60s in the Chisos Basin. So June, July, August are great monsoons. That's when, as the heat builds in the morning, cumulus clouds build, hopefully cirrocumulus clouds, get some nice anvil clouds. So even if you don't get rain, you have phenomenal black and white photography. And then during golden hour, blue hour, sunset, we don't do sunrise usually, but sunset, phenomenal colors. I mean, this past workshop was just spectacular with lightning, storms, haboobs coming at us. I mean, all kinds of great things happen just in three and a quarter days, really. So that's summertime, and there's still some great birds. I don't really do birds. I want to focus on the landscape at that time because it's so good. Mammals might be around. And then comes fall. A lot of people love fall because in their mind, temperatures start to cool off. So a lot of tourists start arriving. September, October can be a bit of a slower time. Good for bears sometimes back in a certain area if the acorn crop has been good. But a lot of the breeding birds have started to leave and wintering birds haven't really started to arrive. So fall, you can get some good skies, not as consistent. You're generally not going to get the storms like you get in summer. And then we come back to winter. So those are just the seasons in Big Bend. And understanding that is why you want to hire a guide for wherever you're going in general, because you generally don't know a destination as well as someone who's been there many times, right? Do you understand what are the various landscape styles, scenes, lighting conditions, and images that a particular destination will offer? Like I can generally tell you at certain times of year, you don't even need to bother really going out for sunset. It's probably not going to be very good. Whereas, okay, and in fact, for this park, sunset is often better than sunrise. Not always. You can get some great sunrises, but I can read the clouds. I'm looking for gaps in clouds where light might come through. I understand the different landscape styles that you can shoot, where to go shoot, where's a relatively short walk, but you can feel like you're out in the middle of nowhere. I understand the different lighting conditions throughout the year. Winter clouds and summer clouds are very different, right? So what images does Big Bend have to offer? I know all that. I've covered the whole park. And it's a huge park, over 880,000 acres. If you've never been or only been once or twice, you still don't hardly know the park, right? Do you know what time of year the sun sets in the window up in the Chisos Basin? I do, and so that's a key thing. So what are the logistics when it comes to photographing a specific destination? If you're going to prepare to go do some landscape photography, do you understand what the weather's going to be like? What kind of clothes and gear? I see people show up in shorts and t-shirts and open-toed shoes to join me in summer. Now, I'm not going to pick a clean path around cactus for you because you wore open-toed shoes. That's your poor choice. But do you understand what you should be wearing? I provide that information when you sign up. But I know what clothes. If you want to stay cool out here in the desert, out in the sun, you keep your skin covered. You don't wear shorts. This isn't humidity. This is dry heat. And if you watch shows on Nat Geo about people who live out in the desert, you know what they wear? They're covered up. They keep the sun off their skin, and we're at a higher elevation, which makes it even more likely and more important to keep the sun off your skin, right? So I know what the weather's like year round. I know how cold it can get in winter. I know when the winds can be really bad. I know how to place ourselves on certain sides of the storms. I understand the physical challenges. I can tell real quick when someone shows up how adept they're going to be at walking around the desert. Are they well hydrated? What do you have to do to protect yourself from snakes, scorpions? They're not a big deal, but there's just simple guidelines. I know those. What kind of equipment do you need to shoot landscapes? How much research have you done on a specific area? I get people that show up out here, want to do some night sky stuff, and they don't have a fast lens. They don't have a 2.8 or faster lens. That makes it extremely difficult to try to get any night sky images, okay? So, are there popular spots at a destination? And out here in Big Bend, there's many. And if there are, how can you put your style on that location? So there's a lot of well-known spots in Big Bend that are right on the road or other things, but so many people stand in the exact same spot to take the exact same image. But do you know how to make it just a little bit different by perhaps walking one way or another? Or do you know the rules in the park about doing so? Are there some man-made objects that might lend itself? I'm not a huge man-made object guy, but out here in Big Bend, there's a few spots that it can really lend itself to a nice image. I know where those are. I know what time of day you should generally be there, how the sun's going to work around them at different times of year. So out here in Big Bend, destination seasons, the monsoons, you want to capture images with lightning like this, you need to come out here during the monsoon season. It is very unlikely that at like real popular times in the park, spring break, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, you're not going to get these images. It's extremely rare that that's going to happen. I know when you need to come out here. Everybody tells me, oh my gosh, it's too hot. I'll tell you what, when I took this image, it was probably in the upper 60s. There was nobody else in the park getting these kind of images. And the more folks joining me in summer go, my God, this has been spectacular. I'm having a great time. I know that during the summer is when the sun sets in the window. You come too late or too early in the year, and the sun's going to get blocked by the mountains too early to get much color in the window. I know that during the summer, we're going to get a lot of cumulus and other type clouds that's going to make it much more conducive for black and white photography. And I love black and white photography out in Big Bend. We get so many great opportunities. And black and white photography communicates texture, tone, mood, ruggedness to me so much better than than color photography. I know what winter weather and skies often look like. Winter is completely different in terms of the light and how it works and the kind of images you can capture versus summertime. They are not the same thing. I don't do much black and white photography in Big Bend in winter. It generally is not conducive to that. So I understand those differences. I kind of know what it's like throughout the year. We get a lot of fog. We get sometimes hoarfrost. We get really cold mornings in the winter at times, and it can be conducive to real ethereal type images like this one. This is at a popular pullout. I even have the sidewalk in the image, which isn't what you normally think of in a national park, but I like the way some of the shadows of the tree were falling upon it there. So, what kind of images can you expect in winter? Here was a day where normally we don't have great sunsets at times in winter, but I began to read this and I had a long drive ahead of me, and I told my client we need to stick around a little longer because as the sun gets lower, it's going to throw some color up on these clouds. So this is a multi-image panoramic shot. It's on the cover. As you open up an album, it's on the cover of that album on the inside. I'm sorry, on the inside of that album, a dual image in there. So really nice image, turned out really beautiful one for winter. Do you understand the logistics again? Like, Ocotillo has very thick thorns. You can actually grab the plant easier than you can like cactus. However, if you step on a dead piece of it and you're wearing flip-flops or Crocs or something like that, believe me, it's going to go through it. Open-toed shoes do not work well. And so I try to tell people you need to be prepared for walking across the desert because I don't always stay on a trail. So beautiful plant, and I love this image with the rain in the background, and you see how this one's starting to leaf out. The rains have come and it's starting to leaf out because now it has more moisture. The window view trail is a very popular spot for folks in the park. And there's two overlooks there, and almost everybody lines up just butt cheek to butt cheek to get a very similar looking shot. But I know some ways to put a unique stamp on it where you're not at the main point, but you still get a great view, a great image, but you're not just repeating the same image over and over and over again. Okay. I don't shoot a lot of man-made objects, but I know where they are throughout the park. I do a Big Bend backcountry workshop for precision, and here I take you off-road. I limit it to the number of people that can get in my pickup, and we go to rough destinations like this is Maresco Mine. It's a pretty good off-road little trek to get there, but you can get some phenomenal shots at these ruins, okay? There's a couple of really well-known windmills in the park. One looks great and one doesn't look so good. Well, this one is often conducive to night sky photography, sunrise photography. Not as great for sunset because the mountains are often blocking it. But this is a really neat destination. I know where it is. It's relatively convenient, but you can really capture some nice shots here. And then, of course, night sky. Daytime photography is one challenge. Nighttime photography and underwater photography both take it to a whole nother level. Operating your camera in the dark, hiking in the dark, knowing where to go. And you might look at this image and think, well, that doesn't look like nighttime to me. Well, it was a bright moon. You can see the stars in the image. Well, you don't see stars during the day, so that lets you know this is a nighttime image. The long exposure and a slight breeze allowed the Ocotillo to move. That's Cerro Castellon. I love this image. And, it's just a very different feel at night in Big Bend. But destination, logistics, safety, challenges. I know what it's like to walk out in the several miles by yourself out in the middle of this park and do some night sky photography. I also know what it's like to be right at the roadside and do night sky photography. So now, under preparation, I want to talk about passion because I believe passion plays a key role in great landscape photography. Here, if you photograph what you're passionate about, it will show. If you try to photograph things you're not passionate about, that will show too. When you love what it is you're trying to photograph, I promise you that your photography will get better. There are certain scenes I see in cities like, at Blue Hour and the moon, and I think, oh my God, that's beautiful. And with, Olympus with OM System Live Composite, it would be great to try to photograph those scenes. But you know what the reality is? I'm not passionate about cities. They drive me nuts. There's way too many people. I live on top of a mountain in the middle of nowhere for a reason, So I'm not passionate about it. I know how to photograph it. I think I could make some great shots. But the reality is I just don't care enough to deal with the traffic, to try to get to a spot and deal with the sounds and the smells, and none of them are pleasant in a city, so it's just not my thing. Develop your own photography style that's going to reflect what you like and what you enjoy, and never worry about replicating the style of someone else. A lot of times we look at other photographers and we get inspired by their work, which is awesome. In fact, we might even want to try to capture a similar image, and I talk about in my podcast that I'll share with you later, I talk about a technique I call pre-visualization. Before I travel somewhere for the first time or the 30th time, if there's a particular image I really would like to capture, I think about what it might look like, what the settings might be, where I might capture that image. And so doing, I'm gelling that image in my own mind. I'm making it mine. So I don't worry about trying to replicate the work of others. In fact, when it comes to bird photography, I love photographing sparrows. Most of the images for bird photography that I love the most people don't care about. By the way, the most expensive landscape print I've ever sold, for a good chunk of change, I got 17 likes on social media. It tells you how important social media is in by gauging your photography. Remember, Kim Kardashian's butt has way more likes than your photography will ever get, so that should put it in perspective, right? Photograph what you love and it will show. So if there's certain types of landscape photography you like, focus on that, Night sky. If there's certain types, certain ways you like to capture your image or edit it, that's great. Edit it that way. In the long run, under passion, photography is about so much more than your final image. When I look at my images, particularly the ones I absolutely love, they are a reflection and a representation to myself and hopefully to others of the memories that are involved in capturing that image, my experience in the field, post-processing with a group by myself, the journey it took to get there, and that might be a lifelong journey, not just the flight or the road, the boat ride or car ride, bus ride, whatever it took to get there, the moments that stand out around the capturing of that image, the triumphs and occasionally the failures, because a lot of times your best triumphs come out of your worst failures, and I believe gratefulness. I don't know about you, but I kind of think America's in a place where we're a pretty ungrateful nation. We expect too much. We don't understand how good we have it. And I think that often shows not just in our culture, but in our art and what we expect. And the more grateful you are to be wherever you are photographing, I believe your images will be better. So part of making the most of the landscape photographic experience is when all of these elements, memories, experiences, the journey, moments, triumphs, and failures, and gratefulness, when they come together, and then you capture a great image. Just the other day, we had a big haboob blowing ass and the largest dust devil I've ever seen. So, you could start feeling the grit in your teeth from the sand as it was getting there. My client stood it out. We stood there till the last minute until even my big, heavy Gitzo tripod lifted up a little bit from the wind. And I just was blown away that it even lifted it up. All of that, I can taste the dust. I can smell the rain. I can still see it. I love the images. I mean, we were there for probably 2 hours at least, and the evolution of the sky during that period. I like to think in terms of the evolution of the sky, where I'm at. People want to rush around. I sometimes like to be patient, and just lock in and see what transpires. And that builds more memories, more experiences. The journey is more involved. The moments, I can just take the snapshots of the sky as it progressed was amazing. So, and failures. I've gone out, I've been in great spots, great moments, and I've missed them, or I messed up. I didn't get the shot, or I didn't get pulled over in time, or for whatever reason, I had too long exposure and the rain covered up some lightning, whatever it might be. I have my share of failures too. So, for example, I love photographing lighting. It is like crack for me. Not that I've ever tried it, but for a while in my life, chocolate was like crack. So maybe it's more like chocolate. I don't know. But I love photographing lightning because I love capturing those glimpses, and lightning is powerful. It is impressive. It is awe-inspiring. It is monsoon related, right? And this image I set up intentionally to put the lightning on the left. It was a lot of lightning was occurring, and I wanted some cars to come through because I wanted that as a sense of scale for Big Bend. You see how far off those mountains are. So that puts this lightning in perspective of how big those bolts really are, how long they travel. So I love photography. I'm passionate about it. I will chase it. I will stand close to it. I will do whatever I can to try to capture lightning in an image. Rain and storms, even if there's no lighting. Again, I think for me, why I love the monsoon season is monsoons out here mean life, renewal, restoration, hope, vibrancy. You've been in a drought and all of a sudden there's a lot of rain and everything is made anew. And I love that. And here you see a rainbow. You see almost two different white balances. You've got this blue cool side on the left of the image, but the sun was coming in just enough on the right side of the image to warm it up a little bit. I was going to go out herping looking for reptiles and amphibians that night, and I quickly said, no, I'm going to be photographing tonight, not reptiles and amphibians, but I'm going to be photographing the landscape. So love that particular image. Long lens panoramics. I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years ago, I learned a lesson. And some of you may not have learned it yet, but you will, particularly if you come out here with me. You ever travel someplace and there's this mighty, majestic, grand scene in front of you? And because it's so large, so overwhelming, our first thought is pull out an ultra wide angle. Wow, look at all this. Take the picture, you get back home and you're trying to show it to everybody, and then you have these tiny little pissant mountains. Yeah, it's happened to all of us. And they become more of a snapshot than an image. I was here. It looked a lot better than this, but you should have been there because that's the only way you'd really see the beauty of it. Well, in a lot of areas, particularly out here in Big Bend, long lens panoramics give you sometimes the same field of view that you would have with a wide angle lens, but the perspective is different. It keeps the mountains large. It keeps everything in perspective. So instead of pushing everything away from the viewer and making it small, we pull the viewer into the scene. You don't need a lot of expensive equipment. I do it handheld a great deal of the time. As you're out here in the field, we're going to take some of these long lens panoramics. Very easy to work on, to post-process, and it has a very different feel than if you used a wide angle lens on this scene. Woo, God rays, oh my goodness. These shafts of light beaming down, sometimes if they're illuminating the right scene, like right here, you see Kit Mountain, Santa Elena Canyon, the mountains of Mexico in the background. This only lasted maybe a minute and a half, and I told my client she was starting to ask some questions. I have a phrase at times, just shoot. I said, this light's going to be on Kit Mountain for about a minute and a half. The clouds are moving quick. Grab the images while you can. So I shot this image. I shot long lens panoramic. I shot other things. I had two cameras going, one on a tripod, one not. And I just love being able to photograph God rays. Sunbursts. I love shooting into the sun. These are all my passions when it comes to landscape photography. A lot of people like to look for abstracts. I've tried, and every now and then I'll find one, but I'll be honest, I'm just not passionate about it. It's pretty. I really enjoy it when others do it, but I'm about nature. And I realize there are patterns in nature, like this grass right here with the sun reflecting about it gives us a pattern. But just abstract patterns, I like more reality. And that's just me. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I have some friends who do phenomenal abstracts, and I love that. And again, every now and then I see the right pattern, it might jump out at me, but I'd much rather capture an organism or a whole scene. I want to try to transport you there to that moment in time, the viewer of my image, or I want them to experience that insect or that mammal or that fish, whatever it might be, when I took its picture. Sunbursts for me, I think they take people to a place where they would like to be. Something they feel that is relaxing. The images are often warm, they're inviting, and I love shooting into the sun. So, sunbursts are one of my favorites. I love black and white, particularly out here in the desert. This image in color is okay. It's interesting. But in black and white, it is crisp in a way. It is rough. It is texture. You can feel each layer of the rock, the water with all the debris, the leaves and whatnot in it, the reflection of the clouds. If there were no clouds, this would be a very boring image, right? But the shadow, the sun, I love how black and white renders this image to the viewer. Okay. Tonalities. A lot of times we have dust, haze, even pollution out here that blows up from Mexico City and whatnot. But the thing about tonality is, here it almost looks like a black and white image. It is not. But the tones are so subtle that you can see the chimneys to the right of Kit Mountain. And the distance, the horizon just sort of fades into the haze, right? And the tones go from very dark at the front of the image to much paler, even to the point that they just gradually fade. Santa Elena pops out, but as you follow Mesa de Anguilla to the right, it just slowly fades into the haze. So I love tonality. I love that layering effect. So again, a long lens image that compresses the image in terms of perspective, and that tonality lends itself to mystery, I think. in the images. Texture and contrast, again, black and white in the desert. Here, it was pretty, it was pretty warm. This is a 4-wheel drive road, but the texture of the clouds, the texture, the smoothness of the open sky, a polarizer to make that sky pop. I think these are not black-eyed Susans. I can't remember right now the name of these flowers. They're great for landscaping. But you see the cactus, you see the plants out here in the middle of the desert, and the igneous rock and how it all works together. The moon. Now I'm going to tell you this is a composite image. That's a properly exposed moon and then composited with a properly exposed foreground because it was just at the time of day where it was tough to do both. I don't generally like doing that. This is probably one of the few images I've ever done it. People way overdo it. They make the moon too big. It just gets out of hand. But the moon in Big Bend can be very inviting. Shooting it particularly at blue hour, when you can properly expose the foreground and the sky is really nice. And then shooting a nice moon or bright moon, I shoot the Milky Way under the moon. A lot of people say, oh, you don't want to shoot that. It's still very visible. You get great shots. The sky's blue and the foreground's well lit. So it's just a different type of night sky, as if the only type of night sky that exists is when it's really nice and black. So that's not the only sky out there. In fact, it's only a little part of the month. So why you limit yourself to photographing only the night sky at only a certain time period? Well, that's just opinion. That's just bias, frankly. It's not taking into account nature. But then there is the night sky. I don't do many self-portraits, but here's one of me waiting for the Milky Way to move over Santa Elena Canyon. And love being at Santa Elena Canyon, a phenomenal spot. Don't always go there for night sky. It depends on what the Milky Way's doing at what time of day. But there's no doubt I love night sky as much for the final result as I enjoy being out in the middle of the desert, whether by myself or with a group, listening to the bats, the coyotes howl, the wind, or when it's dead still. It's just an amazing experience. Now, remember our equation, preparation plus skill equals luck. So we've covered preparation. Now let's talk about skill. First thing, now, most of you aren't going to do a lot of this, which is why I have job security. Master your system. I don't know, there's something about men 20 to 40 that want to brag and always worrying about megapixels. They always got to have the latest and greatest. You know what? I love gear as much as anybody. Okay? But I promise you this. You give me someone who's always upgrading to the newest system but never really learning it, and give me someone who's shooting with the same camera that's 6 years old and they know it inside and out, I promise you the latter is the better photographer. I bet you 99% of the time they're the better photographer. Your camera and all of its features, not just a couple, but all of them, they need to become an extension of your hands and mind. I cannot tell you how many people I see miss images, even landscape images where you don't have to rush, because they're having to fight their system because they haven't mastered it. They haven't mastered the dials. They haven't mastered the buttons. They don't even know all the things it does. They don't know the limitations as well as the advantages. You don't want to be wasting time learning your system when luck popped up right in front of you. Now, of course, people hire me and they go in workshops to learn. That's fine. I have no problem with that. But if you go in a workshop and you don't pick up your camera again until the next workshop you go in, you're doing yourself a tremendous disservice. Yes, you should always be learning. Do you know I take classes because I always want to learn? Sometimes 80% of the stuff I already know, but it's that 20%. Oh, wow. He or she, they said that differently. I like how they said that. I never thought about using Photoshop or Lightroom, or, oh, you know what? Like the other day, I thought of something on my OM system that I have not seen anybody else talk about, and that's using your digital autofocus limiter to set for hyperfocal distance. Boom, solves the problem right there, right? So I am, most men don't read manuals. That is not true. I read them like crazy. I often read the manual for every single camera body I have at least 3 times. And I mean footnotes, because I want to know what are the limitations when you're using a specific feature of my camera. Is there an ISO limitation? Now, OM Systems has a nice thing where when a menu item's grayed out, now when you select it, it tells you why it's grayed out. Boom, that makes it so much easier, right? But make sure your system becomes one with you. Do you know which dial does shutter speed, and going to the right make it faster or slower? My mind, going right makes a shutter speed faster, or stopping down with my aperture. Going left slows down my shutter speed or opens up my aperture. Now, let me say this. Your mind may be the opposite, and here's the beauty. On most cameras, you can program your dials to do that. So let your system work for you. It should be a tool in the hands of the master. You can buy a $500 hammer, but if you try to hold it by the head, not the handle, to drive a nail, that $500 hammer isn't going to drive nails very effectively if you don't know how to use it well. Okay? Now, practice at home when you haven't spent a fortune to travel somewhere, so that when you arrive, certain skills are just second nature. I know a lot of people are worried about how many clicks are on their shutter, but I don't buy my camera gear for resale value. I beat the crap out of it. I use it. It is a tool. Yeah, I love it when cameras are pretty and they look like a piece of art, but I don't care. I'm going to tear it up. I'm going to use it hard. And that's because it is a tool. So when you're at home, if you're having trouble with manual mode, go out and practice setting your meter to 0 by moving your shutter speed quick and your aperture and your ISO. You know, I've got this little exercise I can tell you about that is really beneficial. How well do you know where the buttons are on your camera? Do you have more than one body? If so, are they the same, or if not? Like the ISO button is not the same on all my cameras, but I know where they are based on the model. Because when you're doing night sky photography, and you're that person that has to turn on the red lamp every single time you need to do something, and your red light is always messing up someone else's shot, before long, you're not going to be very well liked in that group. So you need to learn how your camera body works. Read your owner's manual until you know how your camera works and what it does. Or, I recognize not everybody learns by reading, and I recognize manuals can be very technical at times. Watch videos. I have some. Tons of people have some online. There's free. There's paid classes. Hire an expert for classes. I do online classes. Come do a workshop. But here's how to make the most of your workshop or your class. Write down what you want to learn about your camera system. Write it down. And that way when you come, you are a well-prepared student. If you will write it down, okay? And then when you show up, you're not going to get so excited in the moment. You know, people in the Galapagos Islands, the first day we get on an island, for 20 minutes, we don't try to teach anything. They're just clickety, click, 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 click. All right, now come back together and let's talk about how to get some great images, okay? So, if you're going to want to learn more, every time you go in a workshop, have a list of questions for the workshop instructor, okay? For example, when you're out and about traveling, switching from one genre or technique to another. So I'm OCD. Kevin Laughlin, owner of Wildside, says I'm not OCD. I'm CDO because it should be in alphabetical order. Now, I'm not the germophobic OCD, but I'm the proper order and place. And a part of that means I have a different camera body for every genre of photography I like. So I prefer to have one camera body for macro, one for wildlife, one for landscape. Now I've got one for underwater photography. Gosh, I don't know. I have 7 or 8 camera bodies right now. High camera trapping, high speed insects. Because there's nothing worse than you've been shooting a beautiful landscape and all of a sudden a mountain lion comes out and you're not prepared, right? So if you only have one camera body or two, or you use one primarily for everything, if you want to switch from one genre or not quickly, then do you have the custom modes program? Like on my landscape body, C1 is regular landscapes. Boom. C2 is night sky. And there's very different settings. Not just ISO, shutter speed, and aperture, but starry sky autofocus. I want to have night vision on, boosted all the time, right? I don't want certain things. I don't want auto noise reduction turned on because it'll take forever sometimes, right? So there's all these features. And then I think C3 on my landscape dial is probably for using supplemental flash on the foreground. I have different modes programmed on each one of them. And if you program it and you can't remember, take a little sticker and put it between your LCD screen and your camera body, and you can just look. Oh, C1 is landscape, C2 is night sky, right? All those different kind of elements. Image stabilization. When it comes to landscape photography, I often see people try to get away with too slow a shutter speed. And I talked about my podcast recently, developing an internal database for your specific body, camera body, physical body, and strength and abilities. I know what I can handhold cameras at. Here's one, 1/4 of a second handheld at 80 millimeters. Now, I've handheld at 1,000 millimeters at a half a second, but I'm strong. I have good technique. I'm using the Olympus 150 to 400, which is phenomenal. We have both in-camera body stabilization and lens stabilization. I'm telling you, I know what I can do. Most of my clients, if they're 70 and over, 60 and older maybe, they probably can't get away hand holding 80 millimeters at a quarter of a second. But what is your image stabilization capable of, right? Like on my OM system, I understand live composite. I know that the slowest shutter speed I can use is a half a second. So if I have too much light, I either need to put on a neutral density filter, because the built-in live neutral density filter, you can't use it in combination with live composite. So I know that off the top of my head. I have too much light. Boom, I need to screw in a neutral density filter, right? Or instead of live composite, I need to do built-in neutral density filter and just have very long exposures to try to capture lightning. I know which technique I can use to capture lightning. I sold my Meops trigger and my lightning trigger. I don't need those because of Olympus makes it too easy to capture the lightning. I know that my camera has live and built-in neutral density filter. Here you can tell it's a very bright day, but look at the water and look at the clouds, right? They're obviously nice and creamy river, and the clouds have been moving, but it's obviously bright light. Yeah, I use the built-in live neutral density filter to create that image. And I know if I press the button on top that I've programmed, I never shoot in aperture priority. So the exposure compensation button on the top is a complete waste for me. So I reprogrammed it to my live neutral density filter. I know if I press it and I spin the rear dial, I can adjust from a 1-stop to a 6-stop neutral density filter. 1 stop, I spin it left. To spin the dial far right gets me to 6-stop. Now, how well do I know my system? ETTR, or no, it isn't overexposed. This is a critical skill, particularly landscape, wildlife, whatever. Exposed to the right. Shooting in RAW, which you should be. If you're shooting in JPEG, landscape's going to be a rough one for you. It's going to be rough in anything because you're handcuffing yourself. But capturing as much information as possible. That is what exposed to the right is. Yes, I realize it looks pale on the back of your camera. But if you shoot to the right without blowing out highlights in most situations, sometimes we have no choice. If you're shooting into the sun, you're probably going to blow out the sun, right? But we're going to expose to the right so that we capture as much information in that raw file as possible. And then in post-processing, if we want to darken the image, as we slide the slider back towards the blacks, guess what? We aren't adding noise. But if we underexpose and go, gosh, really should be opened up a little bit, now we have the potential to create much more noise, especially in darker areas of the image. So it's all about capturing the most. The more light you let hit the pixel, the more information it collects. And the less noise you're going to generate because you're capturing more light. The signal to noise ratio is higher, and it's going to result in less luminance noise, okay? I'm sorry, less luminance noise and electronic noise. I need you to stop believing in straight out of camera. If I see another photographer post this and think somehow that's bragging, what that tells me is you probably, not everybody, but you probably don't know what the processing is being done to your image by your camera. Now, unless you're shooting in JPEG and you understand the different types of post-processing that a camera applies, color profiles, right? Do you know how much sharpening is being applied? How much saturation, contrast? I guarantee you probably don't. Whoa, well, that's the wind closing the door back there. Looks like the storm's moving this way. So, there's no such thing as shooting as straight out of camera unless you're shooting in JPEG. But then you're handcuffing yourself. You don't have nearly as much control over the post-processing. So please don't feel better about straight out of camera. That is usually a statement that you're ignorant on some forms of post-processing. And ignorant's not a bad word. I'm ignorant when it comes to NASCAR and ballet. Thank God. Those are not my things. But do you have any idea, again, what post-processing, if any, your camera body's doing to your image? What color profile do you shoot in? You probably don't know. I know I shoot in muted because when we see the histogram on the back of the camera or in the viewfinder, that's from a converted JPEG, right? So if you're applying camera vivid, camera color, camera portrait, it's going to affect your histogram some. Not a ton, but some. I want to see it as close as possible. So my images often look pretty muted, not spectacular a lot of the times on the back of the camera, but I know what it looks like in front of me, and I'm going to get to that in my post-processing. So do you know what brightness settings or to what brightness level your viewfinder or LCD screen is calibrated to? No, you most likely do not. Do you have your brightness set all the way up? If for whatever reason you don't like how bright the image looks when it's properly exposed because you've exposed to the right, then go into your viewfinder, or I'm sorry, your LCD settings, and lower the brightness setting on your monitor. Ta-da! You should have that set for night sky photography on your custom mode to begin with. All right? So, 95% of my clients, and I'm probably being a bit conservative here, probably 98, when I teach them how to properly expose an image, they always tell me it looks overexposed on the back of the camera. I get that. The two most important tools for determining your exposure is not the image itself. It is the histogram and the highlight or the zebra patterns. Highlight alerts or zebra pattern, like I think Sony and I don't know if Canon is, but Sony and Nikon, those zebra patterns. And Olympus is all red, and I think Panasonic might be red too, or you can change the color even. Those are the two most important tools, not how bright or dark your image looks on the back of your screen. Trust me. Okay? Finally, and occasionally due to the dynamic range of a scene, you're going to be forced to choose either blowing out some of the highlights or having complete blacks. To solve this, you might have to use a graduated neutral density filter. Could be a soft one, could be a hard one. And we talk about filters when you come out to this workshop. You might need to shoot HDR, high dynamic range, and blend a few different exposures together. Or you might need to expose for the sky, another exposure for the foreground, and blend them in Photoshop. That can resolve those huge dynamic ranges that are too great for your camera sensor to capture all the way from black to white. Okay? So those are some important distinctions. Here's a great example. I 100% promise you, this is a properly exposed RAW file right here. This is the RAW file. And how do I know that? It's a screen capture of Lightroom, because you can't just I can't dump a straight RAW file into a keynote presentation file. So I screenshotted it so you can see what it looks like. Now, here it is with the histogram. I maybe could have even exposed it another quarter to a half a stop more, possibly, without blowing out the highlights. But here's what it looks like once I post-processed the image. Now you notice I brought out the colors. Those were there in the RAW file. I didn't go in and do any crazy enhancements. This is how the scene looked when we were there photographing it. Here's another example. I want you to look at how pale that image is. Again, this is a screenshot of Lightroom. There's the same screenshot, but this time showing you a spot-on histogram for exposing to the right. No highlights are blown. You notice the highlight alerts box in Lightroom is checked. So if anything were completely blown out, it would be showing in red. Okay? Now, there it is processed. This isn't a great image. I don't particularly care for this image. But I tell you, there's a pretty dramatic difference between that, and that. Okay? But I was able to get back to this because I captured as much information as possible without blowing out the highlights in my image. Properly exposed file. This was just from a week or so ago, right? Properly exposed Great Marmaradas Clouds, the Chisos Basin. There's the RAW file. Again, look at my histogram. Maybe could have exposed to the right another, 1/3 to a half a stop. Now that's the way the scene looked. Look at those, the nice yellows. You've got those beautiful clouds, all the colors there in the foreground. Here's a properly exposed file. Again, a screenshot of the RAW file. There's the histogram. I could not have exposed this any brighter without blowing out highlights. But that's not what the scene looked like to the naked eye in terms of the really beautiful saturation. But by doing this, I captured as much detail in these shadows as I possibly can. You'll notice there's no pure blacks in this scene. Now there it is edited. You see the warmth and the color and the contrast in the sky, because that was all the information contained there in the pixels. So, exposure, choice, RAW file. Here we go. Ready? So, I have, in this scene, you see how bright the sun is. I mean, you see how dark the foreground is in the sky. I had to make a choice. Here, I chose to blow out the sun proper. There's enough atmospheric haze, dust, that the only part we're blowing out is the sun itself. I wanted the foreground darker. I wanted it to have that feel. But you notice I have no true blacks in the raw file. But I have some blown highlights, which are the sun, which most time you're going to blow out. And you'll notice I've done no editing to the file. Now here's the image after I edited. Okay? Pulled the highlights back a hair so that the sun wasn't quite so bright. And boom, there you go. There's a properly exposed file. Here's another one. I was driving down the road. Man, the sun, you see the God rays coming around the clouds, the road out of the park with that nice reflection. There it is with some, showing you where the blown highlights are. I had to make the choice. I blew out the sun, but I tend to want to preserve as much of the sky as possible. Unless I want to do foreground blending and sky blending. And with God rays, that's a lot tougher, okay? And then there's the post-processed image, okay? That's it. You see that. I pulled the highlights back a bit and then edited for the foreground, and beautiful colors there. Again, exposure choice. I was asked to do an engagement shoot under the night sky. I am generally not one who likes to photograph people, but I was out doing a night sky photography class anyways. This young couple was very sweet, and I said, yeah, you bet, I can do that for you. They'd never seen the stars, and he drove down from, I think, Arkansas to ask her to marry him. So when he dropped down to a knee, I was prepared for the right exposure, and then I had to say, hold as still as possible. So I had to choose to properly expose the sky and try to get as much detail in them as possible. So there's my raw file. You see pretty far right, some pure blacks, not edited. And there's the final edited image. I corrected the white balance and, tried to bring out as much detail in the foreground as possible on them. Here's another exposure choice. I was doing a long lens panoramic of a rainstorm in the Christmas Mountains there on the north side of the park, right? So I'm going to take multiple images. Well, what information am I going to capture, right? You see from my raw file, I could have probably gone another, half a stop more, but with a long lens. I don't remember what my shutter speed was on here. I was probably trying to preserve a little bit of steadiness. So I shot the images, stitched them together, and now you see my histogram. I opened up my whites, but I only opened up the whites. I didn't open up the shadows. And then I pulled the shadows down to give much more contrast to the scene, like the way it looked when we were standing there. Now, let's talk about reading nature and light. And I'm going to have another presentation that goes into a lot more depth on this very topic. So here we go. Is there a gap in the clouds down low that will allow the light to hit the underside of the clouds? If not, you're probably not going to get much color for the sunset or the sunrise. So you got to learn to look for the gap in the clouds, okay? What direction is the wind? How fast are clouds moving and how fast are they changing structure? All of these elements about clouds and wind come into play for landscape photography. Are you planning on where would be the best spot to be for sunset? Or are you just going somewhere regardless of the sky? Because that's not how I work. I have people say, well, can't we get a more detailed itinerary? No, because I'm a much better photographer than that. I'm not going to, I could be a lazy photographer and just say, yep, we're going to San Leandro Canyon, come hell or high water. Whatever the skies are like, that's what you get. But no, I'm going to take you to where the light is going to be best, where the clouds are going to be great, so on and so forth, right? So, have you placed yourself in the path of a storm or to the side? If you get in the path, and sometimes you end up there, you might get flushed right when the photography gets good. Whereas if you can stay just to the side of it, you can capture the movement and the lighting and everything else without getting flushed from your spot. How well can you spot contrast, where God rays might show up, texture in the foreground, and can you read the dynamic range of a scene? All of those elements are skills that will help you planning and preparing and chasing and capturing light. Okay? What will the light be in 3 or 4 hours as opposed to what it is right now? That's a skill. I can sit and look and go, we don't even need to bother going over there for sunset. We don't need to bother getting up for sunrise. We don't need to bother going over there for night sky because those clouds are going to be in the way. Whatever it might be. How well can you determine what the light will most likely be like in 3 or 4 hours? So here you see, had a similar image earlier, because there's a gap in the clouds, we got great color. Had the clouds been a solid all the way to the horizon, probably wouldn't have had that kind of color, right? So this was a day where I stood with some folks for about 3 hours in the same spot, photographing a very different sky as the light changed throughout the day. Now, March skies are generally cloudless. They're often not that great, but I was on a backcountry road. and I noticed that this light was moving across the foreground very quickly. And I told my clients the direction it's going. It's most likely going to get on Elephant Tusk Mountain. That's that cool mountain there on the left. So I said, stay prepared, keep shooting. And there's the resulting image, which I like much better. I like this image too, but I think this is a much more powerful image because of where the light is falling. Do you know how to look for contrast in the scene? This big boulder here in the river is much paler than the rocks that comprise Boquillas Canyon, and it provides a wonderful contrast to the dark water, to the darker rocks in the background, and I knew it would make for a very nice black and white image. Color, it's kind of boring, honestly, but black and white, I think it has some nice punch. Do you know when certain things are in bloom in the seasons? Again, learning to read light. March is a tough one because the giant dagger, Faxon daggers that you see in this image, which are huge, form a large forest you can see in this image back in a location in the park. But the skies generally aren't that great back there, right? It can be nice for night sky because it's often clear, but for daytime shooting, but we had this kind of unique winter sky. And I said, that's going to provide a little dimension depth. We should head on back there and do some shooting. Again, reading the light God rays. Do you know how to best communicate God rays? Here is a vertical shot of the God rays. There's a horizontal. I believe both images are good. I think the vertical image is better. I often say a vertical subject warrants a vertical composition. Here the image pulls the viewer in to the God rays. We see its impact on the mountains more. Here the whole sky is beautiful along with the foreground, and the God rays play a less dramatic part, but it's still a very nice, pleasing image, right? Weather plus light plus composition. Remember that image I said I sold for more money than any other that only got 17 likes on Facebook? It's this one. Probably 2:30, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, probably 100-something degrees. My aunt was with me. She had never been in the park. I'm on a back road, and I said, this massive anvil cloud is blowing up over the Chisos Mountains. And as you can see, it covers the mountains. It is massive. And this is a 28 or 31 image panoramic. And I told my aunt, I need to go out there and get this. So I walked a ways out into the desert. I debated whether or not to include that Okatee in the foreground. I like it. There's parts of me that like it some days and parts of me wish it weren't there. But ultimately, this image turned out beautiful. 8-foot panoramic print on this client's wall. But if you look at this image, weather plus light plus the composition are what bring it all together. Now let's talk about some night sky tips and tricks, okay? When you're first starting out, stick with the basics. Single shot nightscapes. I have a lot of clients think, well, why aren't we doing this or why aren't we doing that? Because trust me, you're not ready. It takes some experience. Just learning to photograph well in the dark with a single shot nightscape is a challenge, right? Running your gear, finding a good spot, getting your composition, autofocusing. Now, if you get an OM system camera, you can get Starry Sky autofocus, which is awesome, right? But you're not ready to do stacking or panoramics or star trackers right off the bat if you're brand new. Learn the basics and then advance. As you master your camera system, and a large part of that is developing what I call muscle memory. Like I know if I move my front dial right, I'm gonna get a faster shutter speed. If I go left, it'll be slower. I mean, I know that off the top of my head, right? You'll be better able to operate your dials, buttons, controls in the dark and rely less on light, even if it's red light for operating your camera. A client last night allowed the red light to go and it went, turned on their headlamp. Didn't realize it's okay. They need to look at something. But that light it showed up in the image probably 100-something feet. Now I was doing stacking, so it didn't impact because it was on the foreground. Didn't hurt my image in the least. Could have hurt someone else's had they been doing, foreground shot. But learn to operate your camera in the dark. Be in a location before dark to help with composition. Watch out for setting up along a road. I can't tell you how many folks, and early on, myself included, who get their images ruined because they set up where people are driving. Walk out into the desert a little ways or go to a spot that's not right on a well-traveled road. Or just be prepared to have some images ruined. You're not going to want to try to do star trails with live composite Olympus where you're shooting for 6 hours straight, letting the camera do its thing if one 20-second drive-by can ruin it, okay? Be cognizant of your location. And it's much easier to compose on most camera systems during blue hour or earlier. Now, one of the things I really like about my own cameras is night vision. It boosts it and it makes it much easier. Now, when it's pitch black, it's still a challenge. Practice focusing. Getting composition is critical when you're capturing the Milky Way. Just getting the Milky Way. I mean, I see a lot of people who photograph nothing but the sky, and they're all excited. I'm like, gosh, that's just that. There's nothing to really lead the eye. There's nothing of interest there. I mean, the Milky Way is spectacular, but once you've seen some really great Milky Way images, a shot of just the Milky Way isn't that spectacular. Post-processing a night sky image is very different than post-processing a day image. So you've got to keep all these things in mind, okay? Here's a single exposure of the Milky Way, right? One shot, one go. The wind was blowing the right direction because I love how the direction of the windmill goes with the flow of the Milky Way. Single exposure, boom. Simple, set it up, take the shot. Night sky panoramic. So this is Green Gulch. I think this is 5 or 6 different images that are stitched together. Again, here it's very dark. There's no moonlight to help us. And you're at this, you're down by the river and you're trying to get your set. This is once the Milky Way finally got over the canyon. And then finally, once you start doing some Milky Way stuff, get creative, Here, I put my camera down low. I focused on this cactus. So I lined it up with the Milky Way, but I focused closer to my hyperfocal distance so it would render the sky blurry. And you can really see the colors of the stars well in the Milky Way. But my focus is such, I was so close and so low that the cactus is still the star of the night sky. And I lit it up with a very small light. And then you can move on to advanced techniques like stacking and blending. So this is, I think, 20 images of the night sky stacked. And then I took a very long exposure of the foreground and I blended the two. Okay? So this is a blending. You got to do the blending in Photoshop. Lightroom does not have those capabilities. I do a lot of my editing in Lightroom, but for the blending, you have to use Photoshop. And then you can try star trails, Olympus OM system has a great technique. It's called live composite. You just start it and go. And off it runs. So, star trails are something else. And then there's luck. All right. So you got preparation plus skill and then luck. So here's my question for you guys. Is it about the image or the experience? This is a very cool image, beautiful, taken, right. I don't remember if it was civil twilight or nautical, probably civil because there's still some orange and yellow in the sky. But the client with me was in her 70s. She had come out for 4 days to learn her OM system. First time to ever capture lightning. We ended up getting rained and held on. I lost my Tilly hat. It blew off. But she got in the car, and it was that kind of rain where you're soaked with a 50-yard run. And she got in the car, and she goes, that was fun. You know what? She got the image of the lightning, and she has an experience she'll never forget, right? Absolutely amazing shot. Is it the image of the experience? I like this image, daytime, harsh light, but you got this big anvil cloud blowing up over the Sierra del Carmen's in Mexico. And with the direction of that same windmill, it almost looks like the windmill's generating the cloud. Just kind of a cute, curious shot. But I have so many great memories around this windmill, and looking at the Sierra del Carmen's in Mexico. So is it the image or the experience? It's both. My greatest night or afternoon, I'll say afternoon and evening in Big Bend. I had a client that wanted to quit early to go get some dinner with their family. I said, it is going to be good. Yeah, but okay. So I dropped them off in Studio Butte, Terlingo, and I went back in the park. And probably 15 of my greatest images ever from Big Bend came in one evening. This is one of them with the double rainbow. I had double rainbow on this side of the mountains. I had a phenomenal sunset behind me. That lightning shot you saw earlier with probably 15 bolts of lightning, same night. It was unbelievable. I was exhausted. I was running 3 cameras, Canon, Olympus, and Sony. This is when I was trying to make the decision on which to go with. Had a client come out, and this is a winter time or early spring shot, and once the sun got up another half hour, it was going to be a pretty great day. And I said, man, we need to set up and get this. And here you've got the entire range of the Sierra del Carmen right there and on the other side of the river, part of the Dead Horse Mountains, the light on the underside of the clouds, the sun not quite peeking over, and I said, we're going to shoot long lens panoramic. So I was able to capture a long scene keep the mountains large. If I'd have done that with a wide angle, the mountains have been so small, you'd have had a ton of black sky. Wouldn't have been a good shot at all. You know, I love wandering around the desert off trail. You know, I came across this javelina skull and this strawberry cactus. Ocotillo's a stormy sky. That is just such a great image of Big Bend. You see a couple of creosote that have died, a dead cactus stem just underneath the skull, you know, the mud that's splattered from a few rains. The strawberry cactus is a little shriveled because it had been really dry up until then. But we had a little bit of rain so that you can see a few leaves starting to pop out on the Ocotillo. That to me is the epitome. I love wandering around off trail out in the desert, whether by myself or with a group, and just wondering what great things we'll find. Standing and watching summer storms in the desert with the peace, the quiet, the breeze, the thunder, it's an unreal experience. I mean, I've been listening to thunder and whatnot while I'm sitting here recording this video up here at the house, and it's one of the most satisfying, relaxing, appealing things that I can encounter. And so, again, a long lens panoramic capturing this massive storm as it moved across the northern part of the park. Just from a couple of weeks ago, wandering around the desert, beautiful rains, a little bit of a gap, allowing some of that sunlight to come through, backlighting the rain, the Studi Butte Terlingua area, Lechugi in the foreground, some pencil cactus. I mean, is it the image of the experience? Yeah. If I went there and experienced it, but I didn't have an image to share with you, that's not photography, that's hiking. And if I caught an image, but I didn't bother to take in the sights, the sounds, the smells, the stillness, the beauty of nature, I wouldn't have much of an experience, you know? Soto Vista Overlook and this beautiful rainstorm, and later I got some phenomenal lightning shots. But again, Santa Elena Canyon, I was the only one at the Overlook. The only one there. I stayed there until the rain got too heavy and drove me back into my vehicle. The only one. I can still see that and smell that day right now. Another spring day that was unusual, and I told my client we had better photograph this because once that sun gets a little higher up behind these clouds where there won't be any light on the foreground at all. And I mean, the rainbow popped out, that beautiful light there on the foreground mountain, the Chisos on the right. Beautiful day, but it was temporary. I was with some clients who were going to go look for some owls, and we're driving down the road to Rio Grande Village, and I looked back and I said, man, we got to stop. They did landscape photography too, and I said, for just a few minutes, we're going to have a gap as this sun comes down. It's going to be below the clouds, but above the mountains. And we probably photographed for 10, 15 minutes or so and got some spectacular images and still made it down and got to see some wonderful owls. So that is making the most of the landscape photographic experience, night and day in Big Bend National Park. I'd like to invite you, if you'd like to learn more, please subscribe to my podcast called Capturing Nature, hosted by myself, Lee Hoy. I try to come out every 2 weeks. I don't always hit that because a lot of it I'm doing it by myself. But I try to talk about topics that are very relevant to the everyday nature photographer, whether you do landscape, macro, wildlife, night sky, high-speed capture, whatever. I talk about all those different elements of photography, gear, how to photograph, travel photography, all those kind of elements. So hop on over, however you listen to podcasts, whether it be through Google or Apple or Spotify, yada, yada, yada. You can subscribe to it through that, and I'd greatly appreciate that. I also traveled to some pretty amazing destinations, both with Wildside Nature Tours and Precision Camera. My company, I only do the Big Bend area. Wildside and Precision, I go to the Galapagos Islands at least once a year. I'm doing Zimbabwe. I do some Olympus OM system only workshops, like I'm going to do 2 weeks in Grand Teton, Yellowstone. Bosque del Apache, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Costa Rica, Yellowstone in winter. Oh, that place is magical in winter. You can have it in summer, but in winter, I love it. I do high-speed hummingbird workshops up here at my house, generally around August. The Amazon Riverboat Cruise, Panama. Lots of great destinations for you to join me. Finally, it would sure help me out a lot if you would hop on over to your favorite social media, whether it be Facebook or Instagram, and if you'd follow us. Big Bend Birding and Photo Tours and Wildside Nature Tours. That's a great way to stay up to date with the workshops we're offering, with where we've been, what we're doing, videos, and other things at times. So I would sure appreciate it. It would help me out so much if you would do that. Thank you for joining me. I look forward to seeing you out in Big Bend before too long. Get out and go shoot.